dare to dream, right? Dare because what you have in your heart is not necessarily what people are going to see you for or see you as, but it's okay. So dare to have that boldness about yourself, to dream what you want to dream about yourself, and then to go after it.
Welcome to the Long Blue Leadership Podcast. These are honest conversations with United States Air Force Academy graduates of distinction, all leaders of character, who candidly share their stories, including their best and worst moments, the challenges they've overcome, the people and events that have shaped who they are, and who willingly lend their wisdom and advice to advance your leadership journey. Our conversation for this edition of Long Blue Leadership is with Lieutenant Colonel retired Rochelle Kimbrell, USAFA class of '89, who from the time she was in the third grade knew one thing with absolute certainty. She wanted to live her life in the sky and among the stars. And despite those who told her no, or that she couldn't fly, let alone be an astronaut, she went on to become the first black female fighter pilot, flying hundreds of combat missions during Operation Northern Watch, totaling more than 2,000 hours and earning multiple medals and commendations. From the time she was a teenager until about the age of 23, she fought for her dream, achieved it, and lived it until she retired from the Air Force in 2020. Today, she's a motivational speaker and, among many other things, works with 13 to 18-year-olds, introducing them to her first love and passion, flight. Your host is Lieutenant Colonel retired Navir Walkowitz, USAFA class of '99, and Air Force Academy Association and Foundation Senior Vice President of Alumni Relations. Now, let's join the conversation.
Colonel Kimbrell, welcome to Long Blue Leadership, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much, Navir. That's an awesome intro, and I'm really excited to be here talking with my alma mater.
That's right. Well, it's my pleasure, and I think it's always especially wonderful when I get to speak to someone that I was at the academy with at the same time. So we're kind of going back in the day, and we can say that because we're amongst friends here. But this is a great opportunity to share with our listeners a little bit about you and your journey. So we're really excited.
Awesome. Excited to be here.
Well, let's go back in time a little bit. Let's go back to you as a little girl. Can you share a little bit with our listeners about where you grew up, what your family life was like? Take us on the journey.
Take you on the journey. All right. So absolutely. So my family actually migrated here from Guyana in South America. So my dad moved out here for college, went to Howard, and then he was getting his PhD in Indiana at Purdue when I was born. So I'm the youngest of four. And we moved around a little bit, and then we ended up settling in Colorado. So I actually grew up in Parker, which is only about an hour down the road, 45 minutes down the road from the academy. We grew up in a time where Parker now is a thriving metropolis, but it was a really small horse town growing up, where we were one of two black families that I was aware of growing up, and I was the only black person in my class from kindergarten all the way through graduation. So it was an interesting time. It was an interesting town, but I'm an animal fanatic. I grew up showing horses and showing dogs. And, when I tell people about where I grew up and I talk about, Parker had one stoplight and Main Street had a saloon with still saloon doors on it. We used to ride our horses down to the candy store, the Mountain Man Fruit and Nut candy store, and there was a hitching post outside. And people were like, "You're from Montana?" I'm like, no. just up the road about 45 minutes. So very different place back then. And my parents were just being immigrants. They knew that America was kind of the place where you come to make your dreams come true, the land of opportunity. They believed that. Then they believed that you do it through education. And if you were educated, then you could go out and do and achieve whatever you wanted to. And so they always fueled us to just go out and chase our dreams and follow our dreams and, to forge our own paths and to be strong and to go for it. They knew that they didn't have all the answers, but that they were out there and that there was nothing that was stopping us other than ourselves. So they always fostered that in us growing up, which I really appreciate. So when I came out of left field with the crazy notion of being a fighter pilot, they had no idea military life, what that was like, what that was about, what these jets were, no clue. But they said, go after it. figure it out and go do.
That's amazing. I mean, it sounds like just right from the get-go, you had such wonderful role models of not being afraid, right, and taking a chance at the dream and pursuing things that are greater and bigger and whatever we want to achieve. Maybe you can expand on that, because from horses to fighter jets, it's like, wait, that's a big leap. Let's talk about, how did you know that you wanted to become a fighter pilot?
So from about kindergarten, I wanted to be an astronaut. And I was always just fascinated with space and the stars and the sky and weightlessness and speed and defying gravity. Like, it was all just really interesting to me. And I just wanted to be up there among the stars from day one. And so in kindergarten, I wrote away to NASA and asked, what do I have to do on that lined paper, and said, how do I become an astronaut? And they sent back a ginormous package of huge pamphlets and books and things that I never got all the way through. But it kind of laying that process out of what that would look like and all the things that you can do and learn. And as I continued to learn about it, watch a little bit of it, learn, what that was like, somewhere along the way, I found out that not all astronauts get to go to space. I didn't want to do all that training and maybe not get picked, right? So I think, as I've dissected my life, I kind of go back and that I think about, being picked and maybe being, that minority child, not always being picked first. I think that was one of my stepping stones to saying, if it really comes down to you've done all the training and somebody still has to choose you, I wasn't confident that I would be chosen to go to space, right? So somewhere along the road, I had learned about fighter jets. We had academy kids that used to come down to our church, and they would sing over Christmas, and then they'd spend a couple days with you and then go back. Our church had that program. So over the time, I'd heard some of them talking about being fighter pilots, and I had kind of probed and, hit around the corner and listened to what they're talking about being, fighter pilots. And I was like, that sounds pretty cool, like fast and jets, and it's up there in the sky. You're still defying gravity. I'm like, that I want to do that. And so that's where that kind of passion came from. And the animals were just, animals are great companions. So I think just growing up in those scenarios, they were comforting. It was challenging. It was fun. And I think it really is kind of along the same lines. You kind of set your mind out and you're going to go do something that's challenging, but it fills that need for you. And that's what flying became for me further into my life.
That helps explain the move from horses to the stars and then into the cockpit of a fighter jet. So when you said your parents and your family was really supportive of you going to the academy, did you know the academy was the route you were going to take?
Absolutely. So once I decided I wanted to be a fighter pilot, my dad got me flight lesson when I was 14, a discovery flight, and that just really sealed the deal. I mean, just being in control of a little Cessna up there at 14 years old, you take off and the world is your oyster. It's a whole different perspective, just a different view of life in general. And that's how I feel about flying to this day. I love it. It's the ultimate freedom. It's amazing. So from there, I kind of reverse engineered my life. I said, how do I become a fighter pilot? Because my parents didn't have the answers. And so I started asking the questions. And I really looked at it as this is the goal, to get to the Air Force Academy because they had the most pilot training slots. So I looked around. I didn't learn a lot I knew about our ROTC. I didn't learn a lot about it because I learned that they didn't have a lot of slots at the time. I never heard the word reserve. I never really heard the word guard. So that was interesting going forward, that there were other paths, but I didn't know about them. So I knew the academy had the most pilot training slots, and I said, okay, how do I get there? How do I get to the academy? So you start reading and seeing things, and they say good grades, you got to be well-rounded, and you got to have leadership, you got to have sports, and you got to have all of these things. I'm like, I don't know what this well-rounded thing means, but okay, good grades, I can do the good grades, right? I can do good grades and try to figure out all the rest of the stuff. I ended up joining Civil Air Patrol when I was in, I think, 8th grade. And that really just opened up a huge, it was really like a foot in the door for me because it was military-esque. They're an auxiliary of the Air Force. So you're wearing the uniform, you're doing the marching, and lots of leadership opportunities. So I actually ended up commanding the drill team and taking us to nationals and doing encampments up here at the Air Force Academy. So we'd run the leadership reaction course before I even came here, and it was that leg up that I needed for not having, family, second generation, all that. It was the leg up that I really needed to crack the door and go, okay, this is something that, I could do this. So I got to have those leadership experience. And then I played sports, all sorts of different sports. I did soccer and volleyball and ran track and ended up doing swimming so that I could pass basic swimming, those types of things. So it was really a well thought out chartered course because I knew I wanted to go to the academy. And I think that's something that I try to pass on to my kids is like, you've got to have a plan for your life. Like, yes, you can change course 100%. But you've got to have a first vision so that you can start working towards it and figure out what it's going to take. I don't think that we spend enough time doing that sometimes. I think we plan our vacations really well, but I don't think we plan our lives really well.
I was just going to say that sounds like a really good leadership nugget right there. I mean, honestly, when did you realize have you always been a planner, or was that something as a kid that you knew about yourself or just developed about yourself?
I would say that was the first big plan that I created. And it was very intentional, and there was no, the people that say, oh, I just, showed up and I took a flight at the academy and decided I wanted to go fly. I'm like, I wish that's not how this worked for me. Like, I've been clawing for this from day one. So yeah, absolutely.
You had said something about in Civil Air Patrol, you were leading, you took your team to nationals. I would love to learn more about what that leadership journey was. And the reason I ask that is because sometimes our listeners think, what does leadership look like? And if I've not been involved in something, can I still get to a leadership position in it? And so it sounds like you took that on.
So I think as a young person, it's a little bit scary because it's the first time that you're leading your peers and trying to get people to do things that they don't necessarily want to do. Because part of our competition was running, we played volleyball, and we drilled, and it was voluntary, obviously. It's not, to get in there and to go to the drill team. But it was really creating that camaraderie among the people that made them want to show up and want to show up at their best. And it was just kind of my first crack at getting to do that. And I think we were super successful in being able to create that environment that people wanted to be around, where they got to be themselves and come out, and everybody had a strength and everybody had weaknesses that we had to cover, and everybody, and then we get to build them up, and you see that growth. And maybe at the time, I wouldn't say that I took that all in and knew what was, that this is what was happening. But as I go back and dissect, I feel like that's where we got some of our successes, is because the environment that we created was so fun, so welcoming. But we all were on a mission and we wanted to win. So we had that vibe underneath that was driving us, but people could show up as themselves. So it was pretty awesome.
I see that strength in you. Just the theme that's kind of running through everything you're talking about is, kind of finding a way and I think bringing others along with you. Sounds like that's kind of where we're headed. So I really like that. Maybe let's talk about when you got into the academy. What was that experience like? Did you get the letter? How did you find out? And what were your first kind of reactions?
So the only two places that I applied to were the Air Force Academy and the Naval Academy. My mom was like, you should apply to MIT. I'm like, they don't have I don't know if they have a good pilot program, but they don't have the most pilot training slots.
I like it. You're like, plan. This is my plan. Let's go.
This is my plan. And so I actually got accepted to the Naval Academy first. Quite a while before I got accepted to the Air Force Academy. I ended up with a vice presidential nomination for the Air Force Academy. And I waited. And then when I got, I talked to myself, I was really excited about the Naval Academy. I had been out to visit, and it's a beautiful campus, and it would be super fun to go and learn how to crew and do things that I've never done. And I thought it'd be fun to do a summer on a boat and this and that. And I wanted to go away from home. So it was really enticing to actually just say, yeah, I'm going to go to the Naval Academy. And then when I got that acceptance letter from the Air Force Academy, I was like, oh, okay, this is what it's always been about. And so I sat down and I made a list of where I wanted to go and why I had chosen these two schools. And The Air Force Academy just came out with, this is what I was set out to do. These are the goals that I had, and this will fulfill all those goals. And that's probably what I should do, even though it's not away from home and it's not, and I was like, but that was the goal. So I stepped foot in, and it was awesome. I mean, it was everything that I thought it was going to be. A lot of people, not a lot, some people, look back and wonder what they got themselves into when they show up here. And I knew exactly what I was getting myself into. I was excited about it. I had actually got to do to train with the PJs while I was in Civil Air Patrol. And that was way harder than basic training. So when I showed up, I was like, oh, this is awesome. People were like, how do you know how to blouse your boots? I'm like,
You're like, all this is field day.
I'm
Let's
like,
go.
all the things, So I'm like, because this was my plan. I was like, this was my plan all along. And then you start asking people, why are you here? And they're like, because my dad made me come,
Oh,
or
no.
what, you have all the different things, right? There's other people that fought to be here, and there's other people that showed up for they don't know why, and there's other people that were going to just try it out. And so you had the plethora, you had all of but I was one of those people who's like, this is where I have been fighting to get in from the time I was 14. So.
Well, and obviously it shows that hard work pays off. And, one of the other things that stood out to me, she's wearing a red blazer because she is red class. And I did want to acknowledge the fact that I noticed. So you're welcome for that.
Awesome. Thank you. We dominate.
Yes,
So it's the way
I
it
have to
goes.
give, I am doing my part, as a gold class, just paying homage. So let's talk about time at the academy. And you said it was everything you'd hoped it to be. What was that?
So it was, school was a little harder than I hoped it would be. But the hope was that it would prepare me to go on to be a fighter pilot was the hope. And I think, I just knew what I was getting myself into. So there were no huge surprises, which I think was helpful as I walked through the journey. So showing up, doing basic, that was all well and good. The camaraderie that we built around that, being, screaming demons, and then, going into the Killer Cobras for my first 2 years, just a solid group of human beings. We had phenomenal upperclassmen, just the greatest leadership team to teach us leadership and teach us exactly what I'm talking about. And that's probably where it solidified was, really working hard, working your tail off, but being part of something greater than yourself. And that was the first time I really learned about that piece of leadership, that it wasn't just about me going off to be a fighter pilot, but there's all this team building that has to happen in between. And that's kind of when that started to set in. And I think the Academy does that very well in building teams and strong teams through challenge. So I came in and did the basic, did the things, was a walk-on onto the fencing team for a semester. And then I learned about falconry. And, we only select 4 people from each class to be falconers for their time here, to take care of our mascots, to love them and just be amazing, and to go out and represent the school as well. And so, my love of animals, it was perfect. And it was my kind of escape from when things did get crazy. I got to go down to the Mews and play with the birds. And, we brought our beloved Aurora here when she was just a little fledgling, fluffy feathers. I still got, so when I came back 20 years later, she was still alive, and I got to see her and handle her, and it was awesome. So I did that for my 4 years here, which afforded me lots of opportunities to go out and talk to high schools and do all kinds of different things. So, that's one thing when I talk to people about, going out and doing the hard things and getting in programs that are rigorous. Make sure you have your outlet. Make sure that you're taking care of yourself, whatever that looks like, whether it's falconry or whether it's, meditation or yoga or whatever it is. Make sure that you take that time to do that so that you can enjoy your experience, even though it's super challenging.
One of the questions I think some of our listeners have is, as your time as a cadet, while a lot of things you expected them to be challenging and to have an outlet and such, maybe you can share an example where it was a challenge that you had to overcome something, or you learned something about yourself having to go through and experience a challenge. Can you share maybe a setback or something that helped you grow as a leader?
Definitely. I think, failing or almost failing a class, like that had never happened, that had never occurred to me that it could happen. We all come in here as, top rated, top academics. We've not always done things well, but we have surpassed many in our journey to get here. And I was always really good at math. It was something that I prided myself on being good at. And then I hit that engineering math 343 and it crushed my world. And so I started out as an engineering mechanics major. And when that happened, and I came out and they were like, well, you could take that again or you can change your major. And I was like, I'll just change my major, right? And that was kind of the first time that I had backed down from my plan. But I realized that there are many paths that could lead there. And so it was okay. And that everybody's going to have setbacks. So that was kind of the first big pill. Maybe not the first, but that's one that I definitely remember to this day that I had to swallow for myself and go, oh, I'm not going to graduate with this degree that I thought I was going to graduate with. But it afforded more opportunities and different doors to open to find out, that I really enjoyed EE. So I took a bunch of EE classes and I took, so I got to branch out a little bit more than I would have than just being on the straight and narrow and not learning to pivot. And so I think that was my first lesson in learning to pivot, which would suit me later on in my career for sure.
Now, that's a great example. And I think it's really, good for people to hear that sometimes there are many ways we can get to an end goal. And just because the plan has to shift, that's absolutely okay. And that's life, right? As well. So, in the intro, we talked a bit about couldn't and shouldn't. So let's kind of dive into that a little bit. Was that more after graduation, or would you say there were things even at the academy that kind of followed that trajectory?
I think that was all the way from the time I was little. When I was little black girl growing up in Parker, people thought I couldn't and shouldn't do a lot of things. And that really, I think even from a really young age, that really became the fuel to part of who I became. Going against the grain was my norm. It became my norm as I was growing up. And for our military history buffs, you would know that women weren't even allowed to fly in fighters until 93. And I graduated high school in 94. So starting at 14, it was not just you shouldn't, it's against the law. I would tell people I'm going to be a fighter pilot and they'd say, well, you can't. And I would tell them, I was like, well, I'm young. So that's either going to change or I'm going to change it. Those were my words that came out to people starting very young. And fortunately, I didn't have to change it. It changed right at the cusp, right in the nick of time. It changed, but it also came with a lot of challenges. I remember being at pilot training and flying out across country somewhere in the middle of nowhere, Texas, and crawling out of the T-38, and the guy at the gas station at the where we fuel up our airplane saying, "They let you fly that?" And I was like, they let you talk? That's what I said. And because I was spicy when I was younger, sometimes it wasn't, the most appropriate way, but standing up for yourself and knowing that you deserved as much of an opportunity as the next person to give it your best.
I mean, there's so many lessons there we could just take from that just in general. I mean, I love that you said, if there's not a way, I will find it, or something to that, to that degree. Talk about that a little bit. So when you went to pilot training, that path was afforded to you, but I'm sure it wasn't just I want to be, so it's done.
Right.
And you had to work really hard.
Yep.
So talk about what some of that looked like, if you don't mind.
So pilot training, that was I was thinking in my mind, I was prepared because I had my pilot's license, I knew that I could take off and land, but that happens. And once you get over the simulator process and the ground process of pilot training, everybody catches up to you in about 2 weeks. Everybody's taking off and landing. That was nothing special. So that was eye-opening. I was like, oh, okay. I thought I had a leg up. It was the pace of learning and growth of going through what pilot training takes you to, and just the professional process of training is fascinating. It's very fascinating if you sat back and you watched what you can learn in a year. When focused solely on, 2 airplanes, one airplane for 6 months, one airplane for another 6 months, and just what you need to do. You learn a lot. And I had a lot to learn, and it was rigorous. And it really took a team effort as far as study groups and just learning how to study. And those people who had family members and were legacy pilots and legacy fighter pilots were, you need those people in your group to just kind of help you decipher what it is. Or I needed those people in my group to help me decipher what it was that I was reading and studying. And, so it was awesome. I had a great group of guys and gals initially in my class. And then once I split off to 38s, from that point, for many years, I was the only woman in my squadron that was flying or in my group.
Well, can you talk about that a little bit? I think, you said the only female. I was a loggie, so I was helping to load aircraft. And I did get, during Ops Air Force, a ride in an F-16D model. So I got to sit in the back seat. I'm like, this is great. I got a night flight. But that was my Extent Beyond Soaring program at the Academy. So can you talk about what it's like being a female fighter pilot and some of the experiences that you had, maybe that aren't glamorous, that people don't know about, like maybe don't even know to ask, or what that was like? I think it's really unique for people to hear some of what had to be overcome so that things are now normal.
I mean, I think it was a lot of little things that we had to, or I'll just say that I'll just talk from my perspective. I won't speak for all the female fighter pilots out there, because we are all very different and walked very different paths. So I think for me, it was a lot of little things that you had to deal with on a day-to-day that didn't allow me to show up at my best necessarily every day, because I was focusing on the wrong things based on kind of the surroundings and what I was walking into. I kind of think about it as this is a recent analogy that I've kind of come up with, is it's kind of like if you were out in public and you walked into the men's restroom, right? And that's where you were supposed to be, but you didn't feel like you were supposed to be there, right? And so that was very similar to the initial walking into some of the squadrons, or walking into, T-38 is a little bit different because we started out, and I want to say we actually had a large class of women going into my 9913 down at Laughlin. I think there were 6 of us, but then everybody my roommate went off to helicopters, and then everybody else went heavies, and I was the only one that went fighters. So you kind of had camaraderie with those guys initially. And so going into 38s was not as big of a deal. I think it was more showing up at Luke and going through our fighter training unit there, our FTU at Luke, where it's the first time you meet some other people, and then every squadron subsequent to that. And I do know for many of us female fighter pilots, the gear was an issue. So just not having sizes that fit, not having good relief systems on the airplanes that women could use. So instead of focusing on things like tactics and, where I need to be in formation, what our target is, and where I am on my target run, sometimes you can think about, like, I really got to go to the bathroom, and there's nothing I'm going to be able to do about it for the next 2 hours, which doesn't make a good teammate when you're a 4-ship and one person's not in the game fully, right? That is something that you absolutely need to be in the game fully, 100% of the mission, 100% of the time. And I think that some of those basic needs not being met didn't afford me to be fully present when I needed to be at times. And then that kind of goes hand in hand with, potentially causing medical issues further down the road of, not hydrating when you're flying jets, which is key. Like, you have to be hydrated to pull 9Gs. And I know I flew not hydrated many times because I was concerned about other things. So those are some of the things that I think on the leading edge of, let's get women in the cockpit and the fighters, for a lot of reasons, that's a great idea, but we needed to think about it as a community, kind of, what does that require? What differences, physiologically, whatever it is, does that require? And have we addressed that before we invite people into this space and say, go be a fighter pilot? we all managed and we figured it out. And that's the resiliency, that's the tenaciousness, that's the we're going to do this, come hell or high water, that's what we're going to do. And I think that's the mentality. That was the mentality. It's like I'm allowed to be here. I'm going to do my best. I make the grade. I've done the things. I've made the grade in training. There's no reason that I shouldn't be able to go do this, right? And then there's the reality of here's a few things we need to tweak, and we're many years away from fixing those problems. Some of that has been arranged, or some of that has been solved now, and some of it is still being worked on. And I think we've come a long way in the realm of pregnancy and having babies and having kids in the fighter community. It's kind of on the leading edge of that too.
You must be in my head. I was going to ask, what it's like to be a fighter pilot and have children.
And that's, that's challenging. It was very challenging. And I think being on the leading edge, the commanders didn't necessarily know what to do with you. I was at a non-flying assignment when we chose, but I use that word loosely because I had asked, if I was on a non-flying assignment, which meant I would have to go to a transition course in order to go back to the jet. And so got married while I was at the non-flying assignment. And I asked if I went to the transition course and then subsequently decided to have a child, what would that look like? And my commander said, well, we don't have to give you another transition course. So essentially what that means to everybody who, just to make it perfectly clear, your flying career would be over if I choose it to be because you chose to have a child. So that was the thought process at the time by some, not all, because it was very commander dependent. It was very, they had the power. So we chose to have my son before I went to the transition course. And the rules at the time were that you were allowed to PCS. They were allowed to PCS you 3 months after you had a baby. Well, I had an emergency C-section, and 3 months after I had a baby, I couldn't do a sit-up, but they were ready to PCS me back to go pull 9Gs. And I was trying to explain that to the guy at the assignments, and he's like, but the book says, and I'm like, I understand what the book says. However, we've got to think outside the box here, just a little bit. And I'm going to need a little bit of an extension here before I can go to the TX course so I can do a sit-up, maybe stand up, maybe just do some basic things aside from pulling 9Gs. And so I think it was 6 to 7 months after having my son, I ended up at my TX course, and I was in Italy with a 9-month-old going back to the jet. Which was crazy. It was, I'm not sure that it was sane at all. I mean, I don't know, for those people who've had babies and what the first 2 years of life is like with the amount of sleep that you get, and it doesn't matter how phenomenal your spouse is. If you're the mom, and you've still got duties that you have to perform, whether, children's hungry, child's hungry. There's only one person that can do something about that. So, so it was interesting. And then, the other part of that is support for your spouse. We were one of the few people that had young kids showing up in Italy. He was the only guy in the spouse's area. He had no support with a 9-month-old in a foreign country, didn't speak the language. It was tough. It was challenging.
That is. And so how did you, aside from we just got through it, what were some of the things that you might share with others, how you were able to, looking back, how were you able to, so maybe others can think about what that looks like?
We really did just get through it.
Sounds like you leaned on each other quite a bit, right?
We did. We leaned on each other. We, went through some struggles there, and I think what I would tell people, if they're thinking about whatever it is that you're going to actually go through in your life, right, and you're choosing a partner, you have to understand each other's, lives, and you have to be strong in your partnership to try and do something like this. Like you'll talk to a lot of mill-to-mill families and the things that they've had to go through, and we weren't mill-to-mill, but there's different things that you have to go through. So really having a partner that understands and that you can figure things out and you're committed to each other even when it gets hard. I think, because you can't necessarily always count on going into a new place and it being a certain kind of way, right? You would hope that you would have this type of support and that type of support, but having never seen the dynamic, they might not know how to have that type of support for you. So it was a lot of opening new doors that people just kind of looked at us and didn't have any. They're like, we can't help you.
We appreciate you, I think just sharing that, because I think a lot of times people don't, really think about, what does that look like? And sometimes it just looks like you just take a step forward and you open up a door and you kind of, assess and you go forward. And I think that there's something to be said about just moving forward. And it sounds like that's what you did really well, and through communication and everything as well. Maybe you can share, were there any leaders along the way that kind of supported you or inspired you to kind of get through some of the difficult times, whether there and that as a new mom or just in your career in general? What did that kind of look like from an inspirational standpoint?
So this was my struggle, is that I did not understand, and I really try to help young people and people up and coming, and even people who are established in their careers, try to help them understand mentorship. Because while we throw around the word mentorship a lot, we don't really talk about what does that really look like. And so go along my career, I would hear mentorship and I thought to myself, I need to find another Black woman fighter pilot to help me figure out how to do this. Okay, well, when you are the first, there's nobody else out there to help you do that. And so I felt like, and I thought that I had to figure it out on my own and forge my own path, which made it harder for me. And part of that was self-imposed, 100%. But I didn't understand. So as I got older in my career and as I had, gone through some trials and tribulations, and I really sat down and I learned what mentorship was, I make sure that people understand 3 things about mentorship. All right. So you need to find somebody who sees you and the journey that you're on and believes that you can do it. That's the first thing. They need to be successful in wherever it is that you're trying to go. So if I'm looking for a successful fighter pilot, they need to have been a successful fighter pilot. And that's what they need to be, right? I can't learn from a successful mechanic or a successful cook or whatever. They need to be where you're trying to be successful. And then they need to be willing to take the time out of their own life to show you how to do it. Right. And if they're not those 3 things, then they're not a good mentor. But that doesn't mean they have to be the same color, creed, race, religion, none of that. That is not a factor. So I was looking at all of the wrong factors while looking for mentorship. And so I really never had any solid mentors going through.
When did you realize that? And how, at what point did that kind of shift the way you look at things or the way you continue to pursue your professional, whether both in the uniform or outside the uniform career?
So I realized that when I got around an outside organization that was not part of the military, and I found true mentorship. And I think sometimes we're just in the military, we're very busy, and you have to pursue mentorship. You do have to pursue mentorship, right? It's not going to fall in your lap. It's not going to, it may once. Somebody may pass across your path and say, I will mentor you if you want. But if you don't pursue that, it's probably not going to happen because that person is successful. They're busy. They're doing their thing. And you have to want their mentorship. And so it wasn't until I was about to separate from active duty and go on to the reserve that I started to understand what I had kind of missed. And I was like, oh, that's that mentorship thing that people have been talking about. I mean, the word was around for the whole time, but the explanation and my understanding of it was not.
What a good time for that to come, though.
Yes.
When you're at that crossroads. So how many years active did you do? 13. Okay. And that's interesting because some people will say, once you get to 10, just stay in, And so that was a big decision for you. What led you to that?
So it was looking around and saying, where, so yeah, you're at 13 years. You have another 7 years. 7 years is a long time. And it's 7 years of your life. Like, it's 7 years of my life. Like, it's not just 7 years, right? And so I was looking at people 10 years ahead of me, and they were mostly airline pilots or sim operators. I don't love the simulator. I don't want to operate the simulator. Like, I mean, it has its place, its value. It's a valuable tool, but it was not my favorite place to be. So I did not want to be a sim operator. And, my joke to myself is that, passengers on airlines don't like to go upside down. So that is not
Truth.
So I don't think those are the planes I want to fly either, right? They're, great career path, but a lot of times as we transition, we look at the skill sets that we've learned, and the kind of easy button is to just stay with the skill sets we've learned, because we spent, a solid portion of our life, 20 to 30 years learning that skill set. So that's what people would typically lean on. And being the outlier that I am, the strange human being that I've come to be, against the grain, that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to have impact in other people's lives in a different way. And I was searching for something that I didn't necessarily know. And I was able to find it. So I was really excited about that, which really changed my whole trajectory of how I make decisions, why I make decisions. I really dissected things that I had done and what had made me successful in my career to a point. What was holding me back, what had held me back from being, from reaching the ranks, which is what some people would consider more success. And how do I want to live? And that was, and once you become a mom, in my opinion, your priorities change. It wasn't about me and my freedom and flying jets, and it's amazing and it's awesome and it's fun and I love it, and and living the fighter pilot life. It was, I got to build a life for these kids too, for my 2 boys, and I have to be a person that I need to be my boys' hero, right? So the rest of the world, they're wishy-washy, take it or leave it. Some people are going to love you, some people are going to hate you. That's fine, but I need to be my boys' hero. I'm the only person that can be their mom in their life. And I needed to be that.
I really appreciate that. I mean, I'm going back to something you said earlier about everyone has an individual, experience, and it shapes them in different ways. And you can't say just because this person had this, others will have this. But I think what you just said really strikes home, because sometimes the biggest decisions we make really don't depend on others. It depends on where we are and what we want to do and who we want to be. So who did you want to be in addition to being there for your boys, like really like you want to be their hero? What did that translate to for you on outside of military service?
So that translated into, being really a mentor. I wanted to have impact in others' lives. And I realized that sometimes that's going to translate to helping people individually. But when you really dive into people's lives that actually want mentorship, that actually want change, that's powerful. And that changes families, that changes generations, that changes, so I've been able to start working with people on that level.
So it sounds like you made a pretty big leap from, you said you went to the reserve, so you had the ability to continue to serve and then retire in 2020. But you invested in yourself in an entrepreneurial way. And I'm sure that was, there were trials and tribulations in that in itself, right? Because, you have a message to share. And what was that journey like? And how do people who are thinking about something like that do it successfully from what you've learned?
Yeah, so I think, really it is learning your own self-worth, and then not allowing yourself to settle for anything less than that. Knowing that you have value to add. And if you are not being treated that way, if you are not able to give your full self in the way that you want to, then maybe, you have to look at it and say, is there a better way that I can use this one life that I was given? And are there other people that need to hear your story? And so part of it was transitioning into speaking, because I learned that I had more value than being a fighter pilot, right? I think that we are all normal people, and some people choose to do extraordinary things, right? But we're all just people. And anybody's capable of doing something extraordinary if they choose themselves. And so I really had to unpack that in myself and say, I know when I talk to high schoolers, when I talk to young Black girls, when I talk to any minority, they get excited about possibilities for themselves. And there is value in helping people get excited about possibilities for themselves, because they get out of their own way. They get out of listening to people who've told them that they only belong in a certain area, a certain place, a certain socioeconomic class, whatever it is, and they see possibility. And for me, I knew if there was somebody in the world who could do that for my boys, and they would see a speaker wherever, or they would see somebody and it brought on possibility for them of what they could do in their life, and they didn't do it, I would be frustrated. I would be like, oh, you're not living your value, right? And so I thought that of myself. I'm like, if I can turn on, if I can show one person that they have more possibility and they have more value than they've ever known that they had, and it causes them to act, that's it. Like, that's why I've been put here on this earth.
Like you're glowing because you're actually doing something you're so passionate about. I can tell that it really is to your core, the part of your journey. This is just, it's wonderful to see. When you have that ability to change someone's life, or it's more personal and it leads to maybe generational change, can you share a story or maybe an example where you've had that happen with you and someone else?
So there's a young man out in Oregon, and his name is Jeremiah Stroop. And he's one of my he's one of my mentors, absolutely. And he has really helped me walk this journey, and has really helped me find the value and be able to communicate it a little bit better. And he has helped my husband and I communicate better. He has helped us get our marriage back on track. He's just helped us get our finances and just understand like our true value outside of what people think, right? And I've never been I worry about what people think, but we are all a little bit programmed by society, by media, especially with social media now, but by those things, and you have a tendency to react in different ways to what you are bombarded with. And so he really helps me to walk that line and to be better and to impact more, because he was able to help me get my life on track in transition, like we were talking about, as I was transitioning out of the military, because that's a hard time for people. And you walk into a space where now you get to be the rest of you, if you weren't that before. Like, some people don't have to do that transition, but I feel like walking through the time frame that we have, walking through the fighter pilot world, I feel like I had to be a little bit of a chameleon and transform some of who I fully was to assimilate, as opposed to be completely accepted as myself. And so now I get to be me. And that took some years to remember who that was, who that's grown into, and to be able to see my whole self, and then be able to value my whole self, and then be able to give my whole self. And I'm still working on it. It's still a work in progress. I'll work on it till the day I die. But I really had to take a step back, and I realized how much of myself I had put away to do the mission. And so, as people are coming up and they're making these hard decisions, and I would do it again, because it's what I wanted to do. I wanted to fly jets. I did fly jets. It was amazing. I've crossed some paths with some amazing wingmen, flight leads, leaders, leadership. There's the people that, that you don't get along with. But all in all, it's been an amazing journey. But the walk back to self was a little bit shocking to me as I kind of unpacked and moved on to the next phase. But it's been really freeing too. So it's been awesome.
I feel like time has flown by. There are so many good things we covered. Was there anything that I didn't ask you that you wanted to share with our listeners?
No, we did cover a lot of things. I mean, I think I really love to share that mentorship piece because I think it's important for people to know that your mentors don't have to look like you. They don't have to be like you. In fact, it's better if they're not.
I think that's a great message. No, I really do. And I think that really opens up. I mean, then it's almost like the whole world is your oyster, really. You know what I mean? And so I think that's a beautiful thing. Well, what we like to do is we like to share with our listeners like key lessons they can take away around leadership. And I think we've heard some along the way, but if you had to boil it down and they're thinking about Colonel Kimbrell, Rochelle, what are some of the things you want to leave our listeners with when it comes to leadership?
I would just leave you with dare to dream, right? Dare, because what you have in your heart is not necessarily what people are going to see you for or see you as, but it's okay. So dare to have that boldness about yourself, to dream what you want to dream about yourself, and then to go after it. And there are going to be obstacles. Understand there's going to be obstacles. There's going to be failures. You don't grow unless you fail. And you have to learn how to walk through those. But you have to learn from your failures in order to grow from them. And don't be afraid of that. So I just challenge people to dare to dream. It doesn't matter if you're 10 or if you're 80. There's still more life in you. You can still have another dream, and you can still go after it. And that's really my biggest challenge. There's a lot of ways to get to places, and I would say, plan your life. Take the time, like you would a 10-day vacation, to figure out how you're going to get there. Where do you want to go, and how are you going to get there? And who do you want to take with you?
Thank you. So may I just ask, what's your dream today?
My dream today is just to be impactful. I want to impact people's lives. I want to empower people to be their best selves. I want to raise good citizens of my 2 boys. And I want to live free.
Well, I think you're on your way because you inspired me today. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Navir. Appreciate your time.
Definitely. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Long Blue Leadership. If you enjoyed this episode, we encourage you to subscribe, share it with your family and friends, and post it to your social channels. Long Blue Leadership is a production of the Long Blue Line Podcast Network and presented by the U.S. Air Force Academy Association and Foundation. The views and opinions of the guests and hosts do not necessarily reflect those of the United States Air Force, Air Force Academy, Academy Association and Foundation, its staff, or management. The podcast drops every 2 weeks on Tuesday mornings. Subscribe to Long Blue Leadership on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, TuneIn plus Alexa, and all your favorite podcast platforms. Search @Air Force Grads on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, and more for show announcements and updates. And visit longblueleadership.org for past episodes and more Long Blue Line Podcast Network programming.